Being a leader is one of the greatest opportunities, most fun, and greatest responsibility that you'll ever have. Because what you're doing is allowing individuals to succeed, giving them a path to take their talents and let them blossom. So that is a huge, huge opportunity, but the responsibility is serving. The responsibility is not looking in, but looking out and embracing people who want to help you build something. I think if you lead from that platform, people will then themselves become great leaders. That's the opportunity and that's the responsibility.
Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be here.
As I mentioned before, just very interested in general, the topic here is leadership, and interested in the images you have from your youth and kind of some of the people that formed your foundations of influence and leadership and that sort of thing, kind of growing up, moving through college, first job, with all the stuff that you wound up doing with ComDisco, and then finally into politics. It's really just kind of your life story as it applies to leadership, kind of things that you hold to be important, whether we're referring to individuals that other people may know from history or from, kind of the news or whatever, or just people that are very personal in your life that, made a big impact on you. So,
it's so funny because you just said leadership as you're growing up, and I hadn't thought about this in a long time, but it began with a stickball game where usually the two best guys would choose sides, and nobody ever wanted to be the last one chosen.
yeah.
And I can remember one day where this one guy who couldn't play was going to be the last one chosen. And the captain of the team, when he ended up being the last one chosen, went over to him, put his arm around him and said, "Hey, we really need you in order to win today." Now, they lost, but
How old was this?
this would be 11, 12 years old. And you play stickball in the street growing up in the Bronx, but I hadn't thought about that till you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
There was a sign of leadership that somebody came out and said, "Hey, I care," and allowed that person to at least feel that they were going to be participating.
It's interesting. It's sort of like even at like age 11, and even though you probably didn't want this guy on your team, right?
Right.
But
In fact, I didn't choose him.
yeah. So you were one of the captains.
I was the other guy.
You were the guy. Yeah, but it's sort of like you went, yeah, there's something to that. I may check back in with that in a few years, but.
Well, it just sticks with you because leadership has to do, I think, with listening and the ability to listen and allowing someone else to speak. And that has played out through my business career and just personal life as well. And just that little thing that you kind of kicked off a thing that I haven't remembered in a long time. And I've tried to think about who that person was, and I can never remember, but I remember the incident.
I'll never forget when I had the opportunity to interview Pete Newell, Olympic gold medal coach, won an NCAA championship, was GM of the Lakers, won an NIT championship, Hall of Fame guy, right? And I remember asking him the question, how do you manage superstars? Just like this. He said, I never spent 1 minute worrying about how I manage superstars, because they're getting recognition from all over, the student body, the press, everything, He goes, I was always much more concerned about the last kid on my bench, like the kid that if he didn't feel connected, if he lost, kind of faith in what he was doing or whatever, he wasn't going to, push it as hard in practice and wouldn't be pushing some of our other players. So, after games, I always made it a real distinct, I made an effort to go over to those guys and say, by the way, these guys are, but if you guys hadn't been doing what you were doing, let me tell you, these guys wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So,
And it's the same thing. It's just allowing, not everybody has the same personality, as you know, and allowing that person that doesn't necessarily raise their hand and or speak out, but if you give them that ability to call the timeout because they have something to say, and everybody turns their attention to them because everybody's on the team together. And that person that looks at the Rubik's Cube in a different way tends to really display a lot of leadership qualities if you give them the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, and again, kind of the age-old question is, are leaders born or made, right? So is that a teachable thing? Obviously, whoever this was, your buddy, the opposing
Right.
captain, it was kind of an intuitive deal for him. But is that sort of a learnable, it's obviously stuck with you, one way or
Well,
another.
I think it is. I think it is teachable. I give you my own circumstance in business.
Yeah.
We were an entrepreneurial company. We were a group of men and women who could do transactions. And we'd eventually going to grow to a real company. But I would sit there and feel that the way I was performing was better than anybody else. So that when I became a manager, what I tried to do is duplicate me. And that's a total failure. And it took me a while to learn that because of the various personalities that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
So I needed to allow others to become a superstar within their own game, within their own ballpark. And we didn't have the training that you see in corporations today. So it was kind of training by hard knocks. And it was a really interesting growth for me to go through to realize that the potential in everybody is just so tremendous.
Mm-hmm. You talk about your parents a lot.
Yeah.
And your dad in particular about, sort of, what was it like, growing up as the kid of a New York City cop? Was he like a Serpico or something, or what was it? What was the
He was a tough guy.
What was the
He
TV show? Wasn't there something like your dad was on Mike Douglas for?
Oh no, yeah, he was a guest on the Merv Griffin show.
Merv Griffin, okay.
He and his partner, and it was time of the riots in the '60s that were taking place in the inner city, and my dad and his partner were both white police officers who helped get an African American out of jail. And so that got played up in the press. He was in the front page of the papers, and it turned out he ended up being on the Merv Griffin show because of that. What's interesting is that my father and his partner actually arrested this fella because he fit the description. But in fact, he didn't commit the crime. And he was in jail for over a year, and they worked on all their off-duty hours. We didn't go on vacation that year. They dedicated to finding the person who was the spitting image of the gentleman that was identified for doing the crime.
Boy, that's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible leadership, I guess you might say. But
It'd just be wild to kind of think about that today. Like it'd be great if there was a few more stories like that, rolling around today. But so your dad.
He's a guy that had a third grade education, grew up in Anderson, South Carolina. His ship was sunk in the invasion of North Africa. Half the guys on his ship died, and that generation never spoke about it. They were sort of silent leaders. My dad didn't have this huge, successful business career or make a lot of money. I think the most he ever made in his life was $15,000. But his level of confidence, his ability to allow others, his children in particular, to raise the bar and move on was something that maybe you can't teach. It was inherited and based on his life experiences.
Yeah. Tell the story while I'm thinking about it, about, after 9/11 when you were driving into the city with and your father at that time would have been, in his 80s.
Oh, yeah. When that horrible day happened, I was in Chicago. I had moved my parents up about a year prior to that from Florida, and they were living in Connecticut, in our town, but in a townhome. They weren't living with us at that point. And my car was at the airport, and I drove home from where I was overnight, and everybody wanted to be with their families the next day. So I got home about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They came over and, we prayed. We prayed because we didn't know if anyone in the buildings that died were friends of ours. And it turns out there were 5 people in our church who had passed away. Well, the following Saturday, LaGuardia Airport opened up again. So having originally come from the Bronx, My mom and dad jumped in the car, and my wife came. We were going to pick up the car at the airport, and on the way home, have dinner in the Bronx. And when we approached the Throgs Neck Bridge, as we're going over it, my dad says, "Look, there's a storm coming in." And I said, "No, Dad, that's the smoke that's coming from the World Trade Center." And he didn't say a word. And then I looked over to him a few minutes later, and just tears running down his face. I'll never forget that, because recognizing what he had been through and what his generation had been through, and now to see this, an attack on our own soil, was it was just too much for him to take. But that was that generation. It was a much simpler life at that point.
Yeah. Anybody stick out from your, else from your youth that sort of charted your leadership course, like people you looked up to, things you
Yeah,
did?
it's interesting because
whatever.
I did a lot of interviewing, and I would ask that same question. And so I'm going to give it to you in a general answer. Invariably, everybody would lead back to the person that listened to them. Those were the most influential people, the people they learned leadership from. Folks that took an interest in who you were and where you wanted to go. And I've been blessed in my life, from my parents to my brother to many, many other people that have come into my life, including priests and Christian brothers and nuns and my wife of 46 years. I forgot. I think they all have lent an ability where I will let others in. And that's how I think you create relationships. That's how you build long-term relationships. So much of what we do in our daily life is in the moment. Mm-hmm. All of those people taught me to look at things long-term.
Okay.
So I think I have a really good sense of what is the effect down the road? What are we building? And that was a theme at our company. We're building something here. So we were always looking down the road, always raising the bar. And the people who have entered my life have taught me that and allowed me to do it myself.
Yeah. When you think of leaders, I want to emulate that, whoever it is. Like, who comes to mind for you,
Well, the standard answer is your father, Jesus, of course, right? But I think of Ronald Reagan. I think was an incredible leader. He was as humble as can be, and I think that's why he was so attractive to so many people. And I think of a lot of people that you run across day to day who might be helping someone that you notice, strangers that you see that lend a helping hand or open a door, whatever it may be. Those qualities are things that people notice. Don't know if they absorb it all the time, but if you're open to it, you can see leadership in almost every moment of your life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There was a woman in our church who had a child that was severely handicapped. And I remember one day where she was attending to this child at the end. But there was a mother with a child that was perfectly fine, struggling. And this woman went over and gave assistance to...
Was consoling or whatever. Yeah.
And that's leadership. Allowing others to really achieve what they're meant to be, the uniqueness of who they are as individuals. I can remember many circumstances where in business you're sitting around and the person who doesn't raise their hand, giving them the opportunity to say something, and you go, oh, why didn't I think of that? Mm-hmm. And just shock everybody on the team that, how did this person come up with that? I didn't expect that from that person.
Yeah.
So leadership needs to be allowed to blossom. And I believe everybody in a given situation is a leader.
Mm. The first thing I ever heard about you was that you were identified in Fortune magazine as the world's best salesperson?
Well, that would be nice, but it was the top salespeople in America. And
Top salespeople in America. So you were at
I was one of.
So how many were there?
There were 10 or 12, but what was really cool about that is that Fortune magazine and the author of the article picked IBM. And when they went to see some of IBM's accounts, they were saying, hey, IBM are order takers, the salesmen there. And so when the IBM guy, don't get upset with that, but the guys that are truly selling, listening, and helping solve some problems are these salespeople from Comdisco, and in particular, this guy, Jim Duncan. And that's how it came about.
Your business model at Comdisco, describe that. Like IBM was over here, your customers were over here, and you guys were kind of in the middle, sort of.
Right. Yeah. You have to go back a little bit, a little
Yeah.
flashback in time where
Go ahead.
computers weren't readily available. So there was a real commodity market, in particularly with mainframe computers, as they were known at the time. And our niche was trying to earn the right to help our customers solve their problems from a financial standpoint and from a market standpoint. Is this the correct time to buy a certain computer? Should I wait? Should I go with the previous generation of computers? Will that meet our needs? And so it takes a long time in order to earn that right. So we spent a lot of time studying our potential customers, our clients. We spent a lot of time sitting down and understanding what their problems were. A lot of time analyzing their annual reports, so that when we went in, we had a good idea of what the objectives were for the potential client, but also where we would fit in. And in many cases, when you do that initially, we would sometimes say, we don't fit in right now, but we want the right to fit in down the road, because you're going in a different direction. So our philosophy and business plan was to build something. It wasn't trying to get transactions in the moment, although we needed it to pay the bills. But every time I spoke to our founder and CEO, his first question is, what are you building? Where will they be 5 years from now? And I've read a lot of the things that you've done, and I think it falls into place with what our CEO did and founder, without knowing relational selling, okay? His name was Ken Patika. So Ken, every once in a while, on a surprise call, would say, all right, Jim, what are you working on? And I thought he was testing me, but he wasn't, because he already trusted me. He was calling me to gain knowledge. And that's how he managed the company, based on the knowledge that he got from salespeople that he thoroughly trusted. And that's how we determined where markets were going, the information that we were able to supply back to him. So here's the founder, builds this company from $5,000, and when I left, we were $4 billion in sales. Not that I did it, but our team did it. But Ken laid that foundation by allowing that knowledge that we had and the respect that we had, the knowledge, to flow up to him. So many times we think leadership is here, I'll tell you how to do it. And I did that, right, until I learned. But Ken set the example of that it came from the bottom up, not necessarily the top down.
It sounds like too, like when you would go in to see a customer, we were joking about it last week, really like, forward-seeking questioning technique on the part of salespeople, like in the 90s even, was going to a customer saying, what keeps you up at night?
Right.
That's somehow, was supposed to communicate, that I'm not here to just beat you over the head with features and benefit. Now, today, it's sort of like salespeople. people just, what keeps me up at night? You know, salespeople asking me the question, what keeps me up at night? That's what keeps me up at night. But if you don't do the kind of due diligence that it sounds like you guys were doing back in the 80s or whenever, like you're pouring through reports, you're kind of doing all of this, investigative consulting, if you will, before you're showing up to a customer, but you're driving that discussion. So you're not walking through the door saying, tell me what's going on. You're walking through the door saying, looks like this is what's going on. Here's what our solution could do for you.
Sometimes it took a couple of years to get there, right?
Yeah.
So we spoke about a lot were planting seeds in order to influence the criteria that a decision was going to be made on. If we could line up what our benefits were, our strengths were, as criteria for their decision, then we were in a better position to do it. And that's not done overnight.
Yeah.
I mean, that's done by listening, by showing up, being there, coming in when you know there isn't a transaction for you to help out, and knowing the customer very, very well. I guarantee you, across our company, our sales force, our customers knew the names of our children, knew where we went to school, and vice versa. We knew everything about them. So it was a really strong relation that people could count on. And it was such that it wasn't always, yes, we can do this, or the customer saying, yeah, you're going to get every transaction we ever do. It was earning the right to play the game, earning the right to be in the game, to be invited in as someone that they could count on to drive a solution. There was an account that was in the middle of a number of customers geographically in Manhattan. And they would call me in for advice like once a quarter. Well, this goes on for 3 years without not $1 of business. But I had a great relationship with this guy. His son was a concert pianist, and his son would play at the Carnegie Hall. He'd play over at various venues in New York, and we'd go sometimes. Well, one day I came in, and there was probably $20 million of invoices on his desk. So we were going to buy his installed base and lease it back to him. And he pushed them over to me and he said, we trust you. We trust your company. We're ready to do this transaction. Give us a fair price. And they were customers till the day I left.
Yeah. So it took 3 years.
3 years to get to that point.
Yeah. Tell me about the way you hired people, your process for, okay, so now you've got a certain amount of success rolling and somebody wants to work for you.
Right.
So what you used to put people through to find out if they had what it took to...
Well, we learned early on that a bad hire is really bad for the person and really bad for the company, because you invest a lot of money in someone when you hire them, and you're going to put them through training, and we're going to invest in someone to start producing 1 year, 2 years into the process. So I had a farm system. I had young men and women who had just graduated college that would come to me and I'd say, look, I need you to go work for IBM for 5 years and then give me a call. But while they were doing that, once a year they would call and I'd have lunch with them or breakfast, and I'd see how they were moving along. Sometimes somebody would come from a totally unrelated industry. I hired teachers because of some skill sets that we felt that they had that would fit in well in business. Never sold in their lives, but we would send them somewhere where they could get the training that we couldn't provide and say, hey, go over here and learn this. And then they'd come back and say, okay, now your next step, see if you can get a job over here. And then eventually that farm system paid off. We hardly lost a salesperson once we hired them. I mean, it happened, but very, very rare, because we invested our time and energy in that next wave of people that we wanted to help us grow the company. And that was really successful for us.
You started as a salesperson with Comdisco, and then was it VP of Sales and Marketing, or?
Yeah, so that was really interesting. I mentioned before that I started to manage by trying to duplicate myself. I went from the 66th employee, maybe the 10th salesperson in the company, and then our company just grew exponentially. And so I became a branch manager. And then one day I became a manager of 2 divisions of sales forces. And what happened in that process was really, really interesting. I got over the hurdle. Again, we didn't have training programs on this. You know, not every great salesman makes a great manager, as you know, right? And that was our theory. And we were now at a point where we were bringing in different types of people to help grow our company. And we were cookie cutters up to this point.
Yeah.
But I learned a valuable lesson, not only in managing, but in life, when we merged these 2 companies, 2 divisions, I should say. One day, a group of guys that I had hired, and they were buddies and friends, they came and said, "Hey, we need to have a beer with you." And I said, "Sure." So we went out and had a beer, and they sat me down. They said, "You know, the one thing that you've taught us all is to listen." I said, "Oh yeah, that's the key to selling." And you know, and they said, "You're not listening." So when I had this opportunity, I just assumed everybody was on board. I just assumed everybody understood exactly what it was that we wanted to accomplish. So I went back and I thought about that. I said, you know, these are guys and they love me. And they're saying, "You're not managing this thing right." So I did the best thing I thought I could do. I brought in some expertise. I brought in a consultant, and they went through everything that I was doing. And they did 2 things that changed everything. First was when somebody came in to speak with me, I would tend to feel I've answered the question, the conversation's over, and I would go somewhere else. The person may be sitting in front of me. So what they did is they made me get up from my chair when someone came in and go sit on my sofa, face to face. And the second thing is they called my desk the ego desk. So I had to leave my ego at the desk. And those 2 things changed everything. You know, you look at these things and you go, wow, how did this happen? How did I get to this point? And it goes back to the stickball game, you know, and it goes back to the influence your mother and father had, that you allowed yourself to be open to constructive criticism from people who really cared about you and wanted you to be successful. Mm-hmm. And then from there, maybe the first step of truly becoming a manager.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about like all that you had the ability to, you know, contribute to, you know, over time in your career. What's similar and what's different about leadership today versus when you were building ComDisco? There's some things I'm assuming are still in play, right? And then
I think we know a lot more about people today than we did back then. I mean, if you went to the right school, you know, if you had an Ivy League degree, boy, you know, you're going to be set for life. That doesn't ensure that you're going to be a performer, no, right? And so we tended at ComDisco to kind of go away from that. We were looking for the guys and ladies whose father were cops and firemen and sanitation workers and bus drivers and shoemakers, and that's what our makeup. We wanted hungry people. We wanted people who wanted to beat the pants off the guy that had the Ivy League degree, right? Yeah. So that was our goal. In the past, as I recall, it just seems as if there were boxes that people were put in, right? And that once you got command of that box, you were allowed to go into the next box. And today it's just different. I think it's more team play in terms of, you know, working with others, because I think there's a real benefit for many different viewpoints to the solution of a problem that you might bring to a client. And that seems to be more prevalent today than it was in the past. The boxes seem to be knocked down. I mean, if you look at an office today, you know, a lot of open space, movable pieces within that.
Right.
And in the past, if you look at that dopey series that was on TV, Mad Men, right? Everybody went in their office, everybody had a bar, everybody was smoking, and everybody had their door closed. That's not the work environment of today.
That's not happening today, yeah.
And things are changing so fast. So, we were looking for a certain type of person to join our company. And the one major thing that changed in it was that we weren't interested in what you knew, but how you thought. How did you think through a problem? Can you work with others? And I saw that transition. In the beginning, we wanted to get that person that had knowledge of certain things. Business was changing too quickly. And so that knowledge became antiquated in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But could you adjust to the new, to that unknown? Are we willing to take the risk? And that's always a factor for very successful people, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So it's more about how you're processing whatever challenge is in front of you, as opposed to just your IQ or ability to have, like, I solved this problem before.
Yeah, here's an example, Sam. We were very successful at what we were doing, but the world was changing on us. And so we had to make several changes. We felt that if you had less accounts, you could do more in the few accounts. So, the concept, less is more. We felt that if we could put our two major division sales teams in the same facilities, that we could share information on the same accounts we were calling on. All of that turned out to be true and successful, but that was a really difficult transition. Our average salesperson was making $250,000 a year back then, which was pretty good. Now we came along and said, we're going to change this on you. A lot of guys turned around and said, oh, no, you're not. You're going to talk to my wife first, because this is working. But we listened and we talked it through, and we got people to hold on to it, and they made more money, and the company grew even at a greater pace at that point.
So you kind of sold the change?
Yeah, it was gradual. It was not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you change something that's working so successfully?
Yeah.
Reason being is that the world we were selling it to had changed so dramatically.
Yeah, and it was probably going to continue to change more.
Even more so.
Yeah, after your very successful business career, you're into politics now. So what is up with that? What motivates you to do something like that at this stage of your life and your career and all of that sort of thing? And what are the prospects? Like, just from the inside, like, what does this look like? Because, folks like myself, all you see is the bickering or whatever. But
yeah, there is a lot of bickering, because I think you have two opposing ideologies.
Yeah.
I won't get into that, but I saw the direction of our country and it going in a way that really disturbed me, scared me. And so I decided to become a volunteer, because I wanted to be able to really look at my daughter in the eyes and say, you know what? I did what my dad did. He passed on a country where opportunity is something that you grab hold of. And if you're willing to work hard, you're going to be able to be successful and happy. I was seeing a lot of people not happy. So I decided, I had to do something. And I would say that there's two major driving factors why I got involved in politics. We talked about my mom and dad, the World War II generation. I woke up one day and realized how grateful I was for what they gave me. My parents, their generation. And then I felt I had an obligation to do the same for even children not yet born in our country. And so I got involved, and from there, I'm a pretty outspoken guy, and some people have asked me to run for various offices, and in 2016 I actually did run for an office. I ran for the U.S. House of Representatives. But the election was stopped on me, and they moved around some districts, and I was not able to complete that goal. But that's okay, because I've been standing up, and I'm going to continue to stand up. we all have a responsibility here. I always thought politics was something that was left for politicians, but it's really left for the citizens of the country. That's
Yeah,
what it's.
what drives you about it? Like what do you enjoy about it? And then at the same time, maybe the flip side of the same coin, like what frustrates you?
What drives me is that there's such a huge opportunity, and from my perspective, to get government out of our lives, and what that will do for this generation and future generation. That just drives me. You can look at it, like if you looked at a transaction and you say, oh, this client over here has been doing business with these guys, and they're not answering the needs. And I'm saying, the American people want something, and we're not providing it. And what they want is freedom and opportunity and prosperity. And that comes from the people in here. So that, to me, is overwhelmingly exciting. That here's something that can be fixed, and fixed easily from the standpoint of what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Very difficult because, we just talked about people set in their ways. Well, in politics, people are set in their ways. I think I fit in really well is that so many of the politicians were doing it to serve themselves, doing it to have a career. Well, one, I'm too old to have a career, and I wanted to serve. And so that set me apart, and it really resonated. What weighs on me is that changing of what we need to change, or albeit from my perspective easy, is going to be very, very difficult because of an established foundation that's out there.
Yeah.
So for me, it's getting back to the basics, getting back to what our Constitution says the rules are. And if we follow that, I think we're going to be really, really okay. But I want to be a part of it.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like it's also sort of embracing your, sales mentality and just kind of building, what are we building here?
Right.
Kind of back to the
Exactly
foundation
right.
of your first chair. What are we building?
Yeah.
And it's not that comes without frustration or setbacks or challenges,
Right.
but it's...
Well, it's interesting what you're saying is because when I first went out on the campaign trail, all the advisors from Washington to local said, all right, these are the things you got to hit on. I said, I'm not going to do that. So, but of course you got to talk about this and talk about that, talk about. I said, no, that's not how I'm going to build my relationships. And they said, how are you going to do it? I said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do town halls and I'm going to go into people's living room and I'm going to listen to them. I did exactly what we did at my company. And from that, I was able to formulate what I would speak about. And it fell in line with many of the things that the consultants in Washington and here wanted me to do. But I had the words of the people who were going to vote for me, not the words of consultants. And so it was able to mesh it. So listen first. To me, that's the most important thing.
I imagine it might be the same advice, but as you look forward and you're providing advice from, again, a very successful career in many different ways, if you're providing advice to leaders of the future, what would that be? The 25-year-olds that are sort of attacking business or their careers right now, and you look at the whole process of influence or leadership, what's the advice?
I would tell them that being a leader is one of the greatest opportunities, most fun, and greatest responsibility that you'll ever have. Because what you're doing is allowing individuals to succeed, giving them a path to take their talents and let them blossom, let them explode. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is what Ken Ponticus, the founder of my company, did for me. He allowed the knowledge that I was trying to gain, dealing with my customers, to flow up to him so that he could end up being the leader. Just like when I went out on the political campaign trail, listening to the voter. A leader listens to the people that are reporting to him. So that is a huge, huge opportunity, but the responsibility is serving. The responsibility is not looking in, but looking out and embracing people who want to help you build something. I think if you leave from that platform, people will end up getting whatever vision you want to put out, will go through walls for you, will then themselves become great leaders. That's the opportunity and that's the responsibility.
Now, a big part of your personality is sense
Humility.
of humor. Yeah, that as well, yeah. It's a sense of humor, right? It's
Well, I'm going to say thank you.
laughing at yourself,
Right.
yeah. Political correctness in this day, I mean, is it something that is sort of challenging the comfort level, for lack of a better term, that people have to just be themselves? Okay, as you look back on your career and various things, and
Yeah, I think there's political correctness that becomes a weight on people, and then I think there's rudeness that requires some being politically correct, right? You can
agreed.
be obnoxious, but it just seems that in general, people are tending to modify who they are in order to be accepted by what someone has dictated the norm is. This is how you're supposed to behave. I don't think God intended us to be that way. I think one of the great things of life is making a mistake and realizing, correcting it, and then making yourself better. Mm-hmm. But if you have somebody with a magic wand that says this is exactly how you're going to go, if you go outside those bounds, you're hurting someone else. I just think that's harmful. I think it's destructive to leadership. If you go on the premise that we're uniquely individual, and that if we listen to each other, if we work together, we can do great things. I think you work yourself through some of those issues that people have said should be in the forefront of your mind today. Mm-hmm. I think it handicaps people.
Yeah. There is undoubtedly a question or two that you would have asked yourself that I didn't ask you.
The question that I think is missing is, what did you do in order to be well-rounded? Your business isn't your life.
Yeah.
Right? So what other things? And we looked for this in our candidates when we would bring them in. I'd ask the question, what do you do in your community? I guess you can't ask some of this today, but are you involved in your church?
Yeah. Tell me about your family.
Are you helping out anyone? So your business, your family, your community, your church, it all has to mesh. Because if your life is your business, you're no good to your business. It's funny because my friends would tease my wife Betsy because she couldn't really describe in detail exactly what I did. She knew it was about business. We had this huge tree at the front of our house in Connecticut. And when I pulled in the driveway, I called that my worry tree. And I would go in the house and I wouldn't speak about business, right? It was time for family, so I was able to transition to family time. And that to me is really, really important to successful leaders. They don't have to be on as business leader or leader all the time.
Yeah.
Sitting down and listening to your daughter what a bad time she had at school because Johnny threw up and it went all over her shoes. It's a well-rounded person that also makes a great leader.
Yeah, you had a lot of things, it sounds like. You had an ego desk, you had
I had
a
an
worry
ego tree. Yeah. No, yep, I did.
Yeah.
The ego desk was given to me, but I created my worry tree.
The worry tree, yeah. I remember hearing, like, if you see people at work and, they're just really, really different than when you see them at home,
Right.
like those kind of folks. You know what you call those people? Schizophrenics, But
I call them unhappy.
Yeah, I never got that either. It's like you come to work and you're just this raging torch, and then you leave work and then you try to become somebody different. I think you're right. It's all about kind of, melding that together.
I once had a boss prior to the company that I helped grow. Every salesperson, any letter that went out, he had to see. He would work till 4 o'clock in the morning. He'd work 24 hours prior to going on vacation. That's a problem.
Yeah.
You better be a whole person if you're going to be a successful person.
Yeah.
Because if you're not, the success is going to end.
Well said. Now, again, are there any other questions?
I was just curious if you wonder why I'm such a better golfer than you.
No, I don't, because
Well,
it
have you
has to do
seen
with
your
the fact that you play a lot more.
No, it could be that you've never seen your swing on film. Perhaps if you did that, you would
Yeah, I go,
understand what I see.
No, I don't want to be. I shouldn't be doing that. No. Well, anyway,
All right, Chief.
thank you.